I wanted to give this some time before I made a video on this, but I really wanted to create a video like right when I started using this software, just because it was really different. And what I'm talking about is the Affinity software suite of products. There's Affinity Designer, Affinity Photo, and Affinity Publisher. Each kind of has their Adobe adjacent, that you might call it. And I really wanted to do a review of the two products that I've been using as of late, I think probably for the past 6 months, and kind of just give you an idea of what I've liked about them and what I've been able to do with them and how I've been using them and why you might consider switching as well. So first, just a little background on why I decided to switch. The first thing is cost. Adobe's suite of products is no doubt the best in terms of an industry standard, but it's very expensive. That's one of the things that I was taking in consideration when I was thinking about switching. If you subscribe to Adobe's software, it's a cost per month. You do not own your software. If you stop paying, if you can't pay, you lose access to it completely. Second, if you can utilize Adobe, you can pretty much get hired anywhere. You can do a lot of different work, but knowledge of a software versus theory or a technique is different. And so freelancers and designers need to be nimble and adaptive. And so with this ever-changing world, I thought a really good thing would be to just know another software. So those are the two reasons why I decided to switch, was the cost and then just to learn something new. So what's been my experience 6 months out? First thing, I missed Smart Object. Right as soon as I got into Affinity, especially in designer and photo, that's the big thing I noticed, was a lack of smart objects. One of my things that I use for marketing a lot with my own side projects is I use Photoshop mockups for products. I use Photoshop mockups for templates. I use Photoshop mockups for just about everything. A lot of these I've sourced and bought from offline. They're using Photoshop smart objects. Obviously, Affinity Designer, Affinity Photo were not made to use smart objects, so if you have a big library of these, if you're using these a lot, if they're a big part of your workflow, you might have some problems with it, and I did encounter that a lot. Another thing is the simplicity. I noticed that right off the bat. It makes my productivity faster. I can't tell you how much easier it is to get brushes, drivers, updates, and tools and layers to work together. The yearly updates that we see with the Adobe suite are pretty much just updates to existing software. They're not rewriting something from the ground up. They're not really changing all that much. They're kind of stacking things on top of each other. And while I'm not sure of the last overhaul of Photoshop or Illustrator, I can say that it feels bloated at times. You have redundant features, dated interfaces. I mean, have you seen the blur gallery menu, like the sailboat? That's still there. The sprawling menu options, it gives you the impression of new features, but they're just stacked on top of old ones. While this may make sense from a user experience standpoint, this comes at the cost of an intuition standpoint. But when your longest using clients are now the managers, directors, and the people who make the budgets, the sales team will always win over engineering. One of my favorite shows is Silicon Valley. And if you've not seen it, there's this kind of joke about tech and sales and software and things like that, where it's basically called the conjoined triangles of success, where you have this middle line that's compromised, but these two other areas stacked on top of each other. One is sales and the other is development. And what's always determining that middle line is that compromise, they call it, where the engineering team or the software makers can't make the changes because the sales team is saying, we're not going to sell more products if you change it, so don't change it. Or we promised it won't change. We promised that the guy who's been doing this for 10, 20 years, his menus are not going to change, his keyboard shortcuts are going to be the exact same. Don't change it or we'll lose the client. At the end of the day, the sales team is what's going to win out. And so that's how come you end up with Adobe suites that are feeling bloated sometimes. Another thing that I'm really enjoying is a lot of the integrated features. If you are like me, you may have done some web design or web development in the past with things like Figma and other software like that becoming more popular. Designing web and coding web are becoming two separate things. When I first got into web development, you would kind of code and design all at the same time. There really wasn't a whole lot of difference. But now with things like user interface design being its own thing and user experience being its own thing, these are kind of splitting off from where we see the code actually happening. And so now, because of that, you have people who may not know how to code at all. Their job specifically is just to design web pages or just to design interfaces or just to design an app, and you send off the digital assets for a coder to put into the application. Because of that, one of the really cool things is UI elements that appear when you create a new document with Affinity. You can find iOS templates easily, you can find little volume icons, anything if you're creating sort of a mock-up for an app, something really quick, or even if you're just creating a graphic that needs the phone interface background that's kind of popular right now, a lot of that kind of UI feel of posts and things like that. A lot of people are using that, and so to see those elements just quickly available can really jumpstart you with some good ideas and some really fast stuff going there. Another really great feature is the color palette maker. You can upload a photo locally from your computer that you have into your Affinity Designer software, your Affinity Photo, and create a color palette right there. With Adobe Creative Cloud and with their color palette stuff, while it is more intuitive and much easier to customize, this one's a little more random. You put a photo in and you say how many colors do you want, and you set a number, but you really can't do any more changes past that. With Adobe, you could do thirds, you could do triangulated, you can do inverses, anything like that, and it was a lot more customizable. This is pretty rudimentary, where you're just uploading a photo saying how many swatches do you want, and it gives you swatches. However, I will say that the fact that it's reliable, you can do it locally, you don't need an internet connection, I don't have to have a Creative Cloud account sync up issue to get my colors to where they need to be. I don't have to download a color palette. I just have the photo, say give me 10 colors, give me 3 colors, it does it, and then it automatically loads the color palette into the document that I'm working on, and it automatically puts it into its own file of custom color palettes with whatever name I give to it. So I can say it's this photo, date, name, colors, how many, whatever, and move on from there. That's one of the things I really like a lot. One thing that I really was hoping this software would take is Inkscape's place at being the best for image tracing. If you've ever had a raster or you've had a flat image and you've said, well, I really need to convert this image, this black and white image, or this drawing, this sketch that I made, I really need to convert this raster into a vector. How can I do that? Adobe has the image trace. It's not as good as Inkscape. For whatever reason, the open source software is better. No other software have I ever used that's better than Inkscape. Inkscape is responsive, it's quick, and it's accurate. That's what I really like about it. I was really hoping that Affinity would be able to match it or beat it, considering it is a paid software, but I was really surprised when it really doesn't have that option. I mean, you can convert things, but it's not like you can upload an image and kind of adjust the brightness and contrast to get what you want. It's pretty basic and kind of really says, what does Inkscape have going for it that Adobe and Affinity haven't been able to figure out, and it's free. I don't know, maybe that's part of the problem, is that it's free and available to everybody. My hope was that with a more reliable user interface and maybe more stable software, one of the things that I have encountered with Inkscape is it crashing a lot when you do make adjustments, is that you could have something that was even more accurate, more precise, to spit out drawings and sketches that are even more true to what you've drawn, to maybe include character, brushes, meshes, things like that. Speaking of meshes, I can't find them in Affinity. There might be the option hidden somewhere in there, and maybe just a Google search hasn't brought it up for me. But one of the things that was really neat that Adobe was starting to add, that was something new and a little more revolutionary when we were dealing with things having to do with video, especially with motion graphics. People are thinking about animation in different forms and ways. There's ways to animate in Photoshop with frames. There's a way to animate in Illustrator with meshes. There's all different kinds of things you can do. The pin tool, that's kind of new and different. Affinity really doesn't have something like that, and I can understand why. When you look at the way that Adobe with Flash and with its video editing can then take a feature from those softwares and put it into the vector function of something like a Illustrator, that's backwards compatibility, and since they have so much of that software integration between all their systems, they know how it works, they know what they were doing, they didn't have to figure it out from scratch. If a company, say, like Affinity, was trying to figure it out from scratch, it would be much harder to do, to be able to include these elements that were going to include video or animation applications within them. So I can understand why they didn't launch with that, but it's definitely something that I think will very soon become an industry standard. Maybe something like a liquefied tool with a little more accuracy, that would be nice. I didn't really see anything like that. I mean, there could be, I could have just missed it. If you do know about it, let me know in the comments, because I don't wanna like say something that's wrong. Obviously, I'll correct myself. The last thing I wanted to say is, should you switch? That's a really good question. Affinity is a tool, and just like any tool, you need the right tool for the job. In my case, Affinity works for me. Things you should ask yourself: do you need to collaborate? Do you need to send files? Do you need to rework files? Are you working with a team? You may not want to switch to Affinity if your team is still using Adobe. I've not tried saving PSDs in Affinity and then opening them back up in Adobe, but I'm pretty sure there will be issues. There have been issues with just opening things from Adobe in Affinity. There have already been some issues where, you know, masks don't quite line up right, or there's some weird issue with shading or things like that, or colors come out a little weird. I'm assuming if you save it and then try to send it back, you're gonna have even more issues. Another thing is cost. Is it worth it? Affinity isn't free, and so it costs money. It's a one-time fee, and right now during COVID, at least the last time I checked, they're offering a half price. So I believe that makes it $24, and you get a 30-day free trial, so you can try it out for 30 days. If you like it, then you pay $24 during this period of time, and you can get it. However, if you buy it on Windows, you have to rebuy it for Mac, and you have to rebuy it for iPad. It has all three, and you can get all three, but you have to buy each one. So it's give or take. I mean, with Adobe, you basically, if you have all the software available everywhere, in a few months you'd be making that up. I know a lot of freelancers who don't have that much consistency to know, well, if I just forego my photo editing software or my other software this month, then next month I can buy it. I don't know a lot of people like that. In fact, I know a lot of people who essentially will roll the cost of their Adobe stuff into the cost of whatever project they're working on, but in the times you're living in, that can obviously be very difficult if you don't have access to get work, to market yourself, to even work on your side projects if you don't have active clients coming in. So that's something to consider if you're budgeting and running a business full time. Another thing to consider is how many of the features will you actually use. I know for me, I can get by with very little. Some talented illustrators can get by with one software at the most. If you can combine 2 or 3 softwares, maybe into 2 or 3 steps, you might want to look at your workflow and consider what you actually are using and what you actually need. There are a lot of tools and features, so you may want to take advantage of the 30-day free trial to see if you can do your day-to-day work in their environment before you buy it. Another thing to consider is, could you get by with free and open source software? For many years, I got by with free and open source software before I moved into paid products. Paid products are great, but there's a difference between just having a fun hobby and then doing this for a job. If you're running a business, no matter how small it is, your returns and what you're sending out the door in your monthly costs need to kind of reflect what's coming in on the other end in your income. So are you utilizing the features while they might be fun? Are they what is making you money at the end of the day? And that's something to really consider if you're going to switch. So yeah, I'll probably do it. Currently, I've only explored 2 of the 3. Currently, I've only used 2 of the 3 softwares. Publisher is still out there. I really didn't do a lot of publishing work. I did more graphic design and photo editing type work. So I really didn't have a need for Publisher, but Affinity Publisher is something that I'd looked into trying, and so if I do try it, I'll definitely make another video, and I'll kind of give you an update as I continue to use the software and grow with it. If you want to keep up with those updates, I would encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and also I have a link to my mailing list that I'd also like to subscribe for. I send out a newsletter every week with marketing updates, with some of the neat things that I'm finding around the internet, from podcasts to other newsletters to videos to tutorials, blog posts, anything like that. I try to curate a good list of things that are helping for me, and I like to share them with other people who are also trying to work in this ever-changing world. So thanks for watching.